The stars had always seemed like silent watchers to the people of Earth. For centuries, humans looked up and wondered. If they were alone, they wrote stories about friendly visitors and scary monsters, but nothing prepared them for the reality of the Krix. The Krix Empire did not believe in diplomacy. They were a cold, calculating race of insect-like beings who saw the universe as a giant garden to be harvested. When their long-range sensors picked up the high oxygen and water content of Earth, they didn't see a civilization. They saw a supply of chemicals. They arrived in the year 2084. There was no warning. One the moment the sky was clear, the next it was filled with silver disks that blocked out the sun. The Krix did not speak. They did not demand surrender. They simply opened their weapon bays. Lasers hotter than the surface of the sun cut through the skyscrapers of Chicago. Plasma bolts turned the beautiful parks of Paris into glass. In the first 24 hours, human death toll reached 1 billion. The governments of the world fell apart. The great leaders were killed in their bunkers. It looked like the end of the human story, but the Krix made one fatal mistake. They left survivors in the Appalachian Mountains. A group of soldiers and engineers gathered. They were led by Colonel Sarah Vance. She was a woman who had seen war before, but nothing like this. She looked at the terrified faces of the people around her. She saw doctors, teachers, and janitors. All of them were covered in ash. "Listen to me," she told them, her voice cracking but strong. "They think we are sheep. They think they can just butcher us. But they forgot that before we were builders, we were the most dangerous predators on our planet." Under her command, the survivors began to work. They didn't have high-tech labs, but they had human grit. They salvaged the crashed drones the Krix used for scouting. A young girl named Maya, who was a genius with computers, found a way to break into the Krix's hive mind network. She didn't just look at their maps, she learned their language. She learned that the Krix were afraid of one thing: chaos. The Krix planned everything. They moved in perfect lines. They followed strict orders. Humanity, Maya realized, was the definition of chaos. The first human counterattack happened in the ruins of Denver. The Krix had set up a mining base to strip the mountains of coal and iron. They had only a few hundred guards, thinking the local animals were too scared to move. Suddenly the ground exploded. Humans had dug tunnels for weeks, moving like moles under the feet of their occupiers. They didn't use fancy guns. They used old-fashioned dynamite and Molotov cocktails. They rushed the Krix with a scream that sounded like 1,000 demons. The Krix fired their energy rifles, but for every human they killed, 3 more took their place. The humans didn't care about their own lives anymore. They only cared about taking a Krix with them to the grave. By sunset, the mining base was a pile of scrap. The humans didn't just take the base. They took the weapons. They took the power cores. They took the hope of the Krix. News of the Denver victory spread across the world through hidden radios in every city and every forest. The humans began to rise. They stopped hiding. They started hunting. The Krix commanders in orbit, confused, their reports showed that the planet should be 90% cleared. Instead, their ground forces were being wiped out by primitive ambushes. They decided to send down their elite warriors, the Black Carapace. This was their second mistake. The Black Carapace were giants, 3 m tall and covered in armor that could stop a tank. Shell, but they weren't ready for the human will to survive. In the jungles of Vietnam, the black carapace were lured into traps that dated back to the 20th century. In the frozen plains of Russia, they were frozen solid when humans blew up their heating units. The war was no longer about resources, it was about revenge, and humans, the galaxy would soon learn, are the masters of revenge. The Crick's high command was in a state of shock. For the first time in their long history, a planet of primitives had pushed them back. They had expected the humans to die out within weeks. Instead, the humans were evolving. In the deep bunkers of the Ural Mountains and the hidden underwater bases in the Pacific, the last scientists of Earth were working day and night. They weren't just fixing human machines anymore, they were creating something new. They called it the Bastion Project. It was a fusion of human heavy industry and stolen Crick's energy technology. While the Cricks used elegant, sleek ships, the humans built massive, ugly blocks of steel and guns. They didn't care about beauty, they only cared about how many shots a ship could take before it exploded. General Marcus Thorne, a man who had lost his entire family in the first bombardment of London, was now the leader of the United Earth Defense Force. He sat in a dark room looking at a digital map of the solar system. The Crick's fleet was still huge, hanging around the time moon like a swarm of silver flies. "They think we are still on the ground," Thorne said to his officers. His voice was like grinding gravel. "They think we are just waiting to be stepped on. Let's show them that the ground is no longer ours." On his command, the crust of the Earth seemed to open up. Hidden silos in the deserts of Australia and the plains of Kansas launched thousands of ships. They were the first ironclads. These ships were not built for long journeys, they were built to kill. They didn't have shields. Instead, they had 2 m of solid lead and steel armor. They charged at the Crick's fleet like angry bulls. The space battle over Earth was a nightmare. The Crick's weapons were precise and hot. They sliced through the outer layers of the ironclads, but the humans just kept coming. Human pilots didn't try to dance or dodge when their guns ran out of ammo. They used their ships as giant hammers, ramming into the Crick's vessels at full speed. The Cricks had never seen such madness. Their pilots were trained for tactical dogfights, not suicide charges. In the middle of the chaos, the flagship of the Crick's admiral, the Time Star Eater, was surrounded. It was a massive ship 3 miles long. It had destroyed entire planets before, but it had never faced humans. Hundreds of small human boarding pods slammed into its hull. Inside, human soldiers wearing heavy, crude power armor stepped out. They didn't use lasers, they used shotguns and high-vibration blades. They moved through the hallways of the alien ship like a virus. The fighting inside the Time Star Eater times was brutal. The Crick soldiers were tall and fast, but they were thin. The humans were shorter, but they were built like tanks. In the tight hallways of the ship, the human strength was terrifying. A human soldier could rip a Crick's warrior's arm off with his bare hands. They didn't show mercy. They didn't take prisoners. They moved toward the engine room with one goal: total destruction. When they reached the core, Captain Sarah Vance, who had been promoted after her victory in Denver, looked at the glowing blue heart of the ship. "For Earth," she whispered. She Didn't set a timer, she just pulled the trigger. The explosion was so bright it could be seen from the surface of the planet during the day. The Crick's flagship was gone, the rest of the Crick's fleet, seeing their leader destroyed by animals, did something they had never done before. They retreated, they jumped into hyperspace, leaving the Earth behind, but the humans didn't cheer for long. They knew the Cricks would come back with more ships, and more importantly, the humans now knew how to follow them. They had captured the hyperspace coordinates from the Time Star Eater's times computer. For the first time, humanity had the keys to the galaxy. General Thorne looked at the screen as the last alien ship vanished. The fleet, he ordered. We are not going to wait for them to come back. We're going to find their home. We are going to make them feel what we felt. The news of the human victory spread through the galaxy like a cold wind. Other alien races who had been bullied by the Cricks for centuries heard the stories. They heard about the small, fleshy creatures who fought like demons. They heard about the species that didn't know how to give up. A name began to be whispered in the dark corners of the Great Galactic Council: humanity. And for the first time in a million years, the ancient races felt a shiver of fear. The war was no longer about Earth. It was now a war for the stars. Back on Earth, the transformation was complete. The entire planet had become a factory. Children spent their days collecting scrap metal. Old men worked in the foundries. Every resource was dedicated to the war machine. There was no more money, only war credits. There was no more art, only blueprints. The humans were stripping their own planet to build a fleet that could conquer the void. They weren't just a civilization anymore. They were a weapon. They built ships that looked like daggers, ships that looked like shields, and ships that carried enough fire to burn a sun. They called this new fleet the Retribution. As the thousands of ships lifted off from the blackened soil of Earth, the sky stayed dark for 3 days. The humans were leaving. They were leaving their cradle to become the monsters the galaxy feared. The Krill had wanted a garden, but they had planted a forest of swords. Now they would have to harvest the result. The Retribution fleet did not move like a normal navy. It moved like a storm. As the thousands of human ships entered hyperspace, the galaxy began to feel the first tremors of a coming nightmare. The first stop for the human fleet was a planet called Krill Prime 4. It was a major shipyard for the Krill Empire. Thousands of alien workers lived there, building the beautiful silver ships that had once burned Earth. When the human fleet arrived, the Krill commanders didn't even have time to raise their shields. The humans didn't send a message. They didn't ask for a surrender. They simply opened fire. Huge balls of tungsten metal launched at nearly the speed of light smashed into the shipyards. The metal wasn't explosive, but the sheer speed made it hit with the force of an atomic bomb. In minutes, the shipyards were nothing but dust floating in the dark. The Great Galactic Council, watching from their safe world of Valhalla, was horrified. They sent a messenger to meet General Thorne's flagship. The messenger belonged to the Luma, a tall, glowing race that valued peace above all. The Luma ambassador, being named Alara, stepped onto the human ship, the Time's dreadnought Earth. She expected to see a sophisticated military bridge. Instead, she saw a room filled with machines that smelled of oil and sweat. She saw humans with scars on their faces and fire in their eyes. "General Thorne," Elara said, her voice shaking, "the council demands that you stop this violence. You have defended your home, now you're committing murder. There are rules to war in this galaxy." Thorne didn't even look up from his map. "The Krill didn't follow your rules when they burned my city," he said. "They didn't follow your rules when they killed my children. Why should I care about your rules now?" Elara tried to explain that the galaxy was a delicate balance. She told him that if the humans destroyed the Krill, it would leave a hole that other empires would fight over. Thorne finally looked at her. His eyes were cold and empty. "We aren't here to join your galaxy," he told her. "We are here to finish what they started. If you stand in our way, we will walk over you too." The ambassador left the ship in a state of terror. She reported back to the council that the humans were not just a new species. They were a force of nature. They were total war made flesh. The council realized that they could no longer ignore the humans. They had to choose a side. Some wanted to help the Krill to stop the human plague. Others were so scared of the humans that they wanted to hide and hope the storm passed them by. While the council talked, the humans moved deeper into Krill space. They didn't just attack military targets, they attacked anything that helped the Krill fight. They destroyed the fuel refineries, they blocked the trade routes, they poisoned the water supplies of the Krill army bases. The Krill, who had always been the bullies of the stars, found themselves on the other side of the knife. They tried to fight back using their superior technology, but the humans were learning too fast. Every time a human ship was destroyed, the survivors would float in escape pods, taking pictures and data of the Krill weapons. That data was sent back to Earth, and within a week, the human fleet would have a new defense against that specific weapon. It was an evolution of war that the galaxy had never seen. The humans were turning the Krill's own strengths against them. The most terrifying thing about the humans was their scorched spaces policy. When the humans took a Krill planet, they didn't keep it. They didn't set up a government. They simply removed every piece of Krill technology, took all the metal, and moved on to the next world. They left behind planets that were empty and silent. The Krill began to panic. Their soldiers, once proud and brave, started to desert. They heard stories about the ghosts of Earth, human commandos who could sneak into a base and kill everyone inside without firing a single loud shot. The name human became a curse. Parents on Krill worlds would tell their children to be quiet or the humans would hear them. The galaxy was starting to tremble. The Krill Empire, which had stood for 10,000 years, was crumbling in less than 6 months. In the middle of this, a new legend was born. The first Terran Shock Division. These were the humans who had survived the very first day of the invasion on Earth. They wore armor painted black, with the image of a white skull on their chests. They were the ones who were sent to the hardest battles. They didn't use guns often. They preferred to get close. They wanted to see the fear in the Krill's eyes. They were led by Sarah Vance, who had become a symbol of human survival in a battle on the moon of Krill Alpha. Vance and her team took down a fortress that was supposed to be invincible. They didn't use bombs. They used a captured Krill cargo ship and crashed it into the main gate. Then they walked out of the fire, shooting anything that moved. When the battle was over, Vance stood on the highest tower and looked out at the stars. She knew they were close to the Krill homeworld, and she knew that when they got there, the galaxy would never be the same again. The Krill homeworld, a shimmering jewel of glass and gold known as Krillxia, was finally within the sights of the human fleet, but it was not alone. The great Galactic Council, terrified that the humans would not stop after destroying the Krill, had assembled a peacekeeping force. Thousands of ships from a dozen different alien species stood between humanity and their revenge. They formed a massive wall of light and energy, hoping that the sight of such power would make General Thorn turn back. The Luma, the Zent, and the Drax had all sent their best warriors. They didn't love the Krill, but they feared the humans more. They saw humanity as a fire that would burn the entire galaxy if it wasn't put out. Now, on the bridge of the Times Dreadnought Earth, the atmosphere was heavy. Sensors showed over 50,000 alien ships blocking their path. General Thorn stood at the viewport, his hands clasped behind his back. "They sent a message, sir," an ensign whispered. "The Council says if we cross the line, the entire galaxy will declare war on humanity. They say they are protecting the civilized order." Thorn didn't blink. He didn't even look at the message. "The civilized order stood by while our world burned," he said quietly. "They watched the Krill kill our children and did nothing. Now they want to talk about peace. Because the bully is losing, tell the fleet to prepare the Hellburner missiles." The Hellburner was a weapon born of pure human spite. It was a missile filled with a chemical that burned even in the vacuum of space. It didn't just explode, it clung to hulls and melted through armor like acid. When the human fleet began its move, the Council ships fired a warning shot. It hit the human front line, destroying several destroyers. That was all the excuse Thorn needed. "Commence the purge," he ordered. The space between the two fleets erupted in a display of violence that the galaxy would remember for 1,000,000 years. The humans didn't try to outmaneuver the Council. They simply pushed through the middle, their heavy armor soaking up laser fire that would have melted any other ship. They were like a pack of wolves jumping into a flock of birds. The Council forces were shocked. They had more ships and better technology, but they didn't have the stomach for a meat grinder war. When a Luma ship was damaged, it would retreat to repair. When a human ship was damaged, the crew would accelerate toward the nearest enemy vessel. The humans were fighting with a total lack of concern for their own survival. This psychological edge was more powerful than any laser. The alien pilots began to break formation. They saw human ships that were half melted and venting oxygen, still firing their guns until the very second they exploded. One Drax commander famously radioed his home planet saying, "We are not fighting soldiers, we are fighting ghosts who refuse to stay dead." In the middle of the battle, Colonel Sarah Vance led a dropship mission. She wasn't aiming for Krillxia yet. She was aiming for the Council's command station, a massive space station that coordinated the entire defense. Her ship, the Time's Vengeance, took heavy fire, losing its left engine. "Keep it steady," Vance shouted over the alarms. They slammed into the docking bay of the station at full speed. The human soldiers poured out of the wreckage before the smoke even cleared. They were met by elite Zent guards, four-armed giants with energy shields. The humans used gravity bombs that flattened the shields and the guards alike. Vance moved with a cold, robotic efficiency. She reached the command center and took the Council Admiral hostage. She didn't kill him. She made him watch the screens. She made him watch as the human fleet broke the Council's wall. She made him watch as the Crixia defense satellites were turned into scrap metal. Look at it, Vance told the Admiral. This is what happens when you let monsters run wild. You thought you could control the war. You can't. You can only survive it. By the time the battle ended, the Council fleet was in ruins. Those who could jump to hyperspace did so, leaving the Crixia system defenseless. The humans didn't chase them. They didn't care about the Council anymore. All their focus was on the planet below Crixia, the heart of the empire that had tried to erase humanity was now open and exposed. The galaxy held its breath. Would the humans destroy the planet? Would they kill every Crix? The answer would define the future of every living soul in the stars. On the surface of Crixia, the citizens looked up. They saw the stars disappearing as the human fleet moved into low orbit. There were no more silver ships to protect them. The humans didn't send down a landing force at first. Instead, they broadcast a single image to every screen on the planet. It was a picture of Earth taken from space, showing the giant black scars left by the Crix bombardment. Below the picture were 3 words in the Crix language: "We remember you." The panic on the planet was total. The Crix leaders tried to flee in private shuttles, but human snipers in orbit picked them off before they could even leave the atmosphere. Humanity had built a cage around the world, and now they were ready to step inside. The sky over Crixia was no longer blue. It was a bruised purple filled with the silhouettes of thousands of human troop carriers, the Crix civilians who had lived their lives in luxury and peace, while their armies conquered the stars, were now frozen in terror. They watched as the first human boots touched the soil of their capital city. These were not the monsters they saw in their news reports. These were men and women with faces made of stone. They did not shout. They did not loot. They moved with a terrifying, quiet discipline. General Marcus Thorne was the first to step out of his command shuttle. He didn't wear a helmet. He wanted to breathe the air of the world that had tried to kill his own. The Crix leaders, hiding in a bunker deep underground, sent a message of total surrender. They offered gold, technology, and planets. They begged for their lives. Thorne's response was sent back in seconds. "We didn't come for your gold. We came for your memory." Under to his orders, the human army began the grand deconstruction. They didn't burn the cities. They took them apart. Every statue of a Crix hero, every library of Crix history, and every monument of their empire was systematically destroyed. The humans were not just winning a war. They were erasing the Crix from history. They wanted to make sure that in a 1,000 years, no one would even remember that the Crix had ever existed. This was a fate worse than death for the proud alien race. As the days went by, the Crix people were rounded up. They expected to be executed in mass groups, but the humans did something different. They took the Crix and placed them on transport ships. They weren't taking them to labor camps. They were taking them to the edge of the Galaxy to a cold, rocky planet with no resources and no technology. You wanted to treat us like animals, Sarah Vance told a group of Crick's nobles, as they were forced onto a ship. Now you will live like them. You will learn what it is like to start from nothing. You will learn the value of a single drop of water and a piece of bread. Maybe in 1,000,000 years, your children will be better than you. While the Cricks were being exiled, the rest of the galaxy watched in horror. The Galactic Council met in emergency sessions every day. They were terrified that humanity would turn its sights on them next. The Luma ambassador, Ilara, requested one final meeting with Thorn. She found him standing in the ruins of the Crick's great palace. You have one general, she said, her voice small. The Cricks are gone. Their empire is dust. Are you satisfied? Will you now let the galaxy have peace? Thorn looked at the piles of rubble around him. Peace is a fragile thing, Ilara, he replied. We didn't ask for this war. We were a species of poets, teachers, and dreamers. You and your council watched as our poets were silenced and our dreamers were killed. You taught us that only the brutal survive. Thorn turned to look at the stars, which were now dominated by human patrols. We are going back to Earth, he said, but we are leaving a message for everyone else. We will not rule you. We do not want your planets or your taxes, but if any of you ever lift a finger against a human child again, if you even think about coming to our solar system with bad intent, we will not just fight you, we will end you. We will tear down your history and scatter your people to the winds, just like we did to the Cricks. Ilara realized then that the humans had changed forever. They were no longer the monsters the Cricks had tried to make them. They were something new. The galaxy's ultimate deterrent. The human fleet began to leave Crixia. They left behind a dead world stripped of everything that made it a civilization. They left behind a warning that would echo through the centuries on Earth. The reconstruction began. The scars were still there, but the people were different. They were harder, but they were also united. They had looked into the abyss and didn't just survive, they conquered it. The great human war ended, but the human silence began. For the next 500 years, no alien ship ever dared to enter human space. No diplomat ever tried to trick a human leader. The very word human became a word used to quiet disobedient children across 1,000 star systems. The story of the war was carved into a massive wall on Earth where the ruins of the old world used to be. It was written in every human language, and at the bottom there was a list of names that went on for miles. It was a reminder of the price of survival. Humanity had become the apex predator of the galaxy, not because they wanted to be, but because they had to be. They had fought a war so brutal that the galaxy would always tremble whenever their name was spoken. And in the deep dark of space, the other races looked at the blue dot of Earth with a mixture of respect and absolute bone-chilling fear. The hunters had become the guardians, and the galaxy was finally, bloodily, at peace. 500 years had passed since the Cricks Empire was erased from the stars. The galaxy had become a very quiet place. Most of the alien races stayed within their own borders. They were afraid of waking the sleeping giant that was Earth, but time has a way of making people forget. A new generation of leaders arose in the Galactic Council. These leaders had never seen a human, they only knew humans from old stories and dusty records. To them, the humans were a myth, or a lucky race that had won a war long ago. One race known as the Vorsh was particularly bold. They were a species of tall, metallic beings who believed they were the true masters of technology. They looked at the human borders, the Terran exclusion zone, and saw empty space filled with resources that no one was using. The Vorsh High King, a being named Kalen, decided to test the humans. He didn't send a fleet, he sent a single mining ship into the edge of human space. He wanted to see if the humans were still there or if they had died out. Behind their walls, the mining ship crossed the border near the ghost planet of Crixia. For 3 days nothing happened. The Vorsh cheered. They thought the humans were gone, but on the 4th day the mining ship vanished. There was no explosion, no distress signal, and no debris. It simply stopped existing. Kalen was angry, not scared. He sent small battle group of 10 ships to find out what happened. He told his people that the human myth was over. He was about to make the biggest mistake in 5 centuries. When the Vorsh battle group reached the coordinates, they found something that made their sensors glitch. It was a single human ship, but it didn't look like the old steel blocks from the history books. It was made of a dark, shifting material that seemed to swallow the light around it. It had no visible engines and no visible guns. It just sat there, cold and silent. The Vorch commander, thinking he had the advantage, sent a message. "This is Vorch territory. Now leave or be destroyed." The response from the human ship was a single audio file. It wasn't a voice. It was the sound of a human heartbeat, steady and slow. Then the dark ship began to move. It didn't fly. It seemed to slide through space, appearing in one spot and then another. The Vorch fired their pride-heavy plasma cannons that could melt a moon. The beams hit the human ship and simply disappeared, as if the dark material was eating the energy. Then the human ship blinked. In a microsecond, it was in the middle of the Vorch formation. A wave of invisible energy moved outward from the human vessel. The Vorch ships didn't explode. Instead, their metal hulls began to turn into dust. The air inside the ships leaked out as the walls simply crumbled. The Vorch soldiers didn't even have time to scream before they were floating in the cold void. The human ship didn't stay to watch. It blinked again and was gone, leaving only 10 clouds of dust where the battle group had been. News of the dust massacre reached the Galactic Council. The younger races were confused, but the oldest members, the few Luma and Drax, who still remembered the old stories, began to shake with fear. They knew the heartbeat. It was the sound of a predator that had been disturbed. The council called an emergency meeting. They begged the Vorch king to stop, but Kalen was blinded by his ego. He gathered his entire grand fleet, 20,000 ships. He planned to march all the way to Earth and prove that the Vorch were the new masters of the galaxy. "We are not the Crix," he shouted to his people. "We are the Vorch. We do not fear shadows." As his fleet jumped toward the Terran border, every star in the sky seemed to dim. On Earth, the silence was broken. Deep inside the planet, in chambers that had been sealed for centuries, the ancient AI systems woke up. The humans of this era were not The soldiers of Thorn's time, they were. A peaceful people who lived in harmony with their world, but they had never forgotten their history. Every human child was taught that their peace was bought with a terrible price. When the Vorch fleet appeared at the edge of the solar system, the humans didn't panic. They didn't run to bunkers. They simply walked to their control centers. They didn't hate the Vorch. They felt a strange kind of pity for them. The Vorch didn't realize that they weren't attacking a planet. They were attacking a fortress that had been preparing for this moment for 500 years. The Vorch Grand Fleet arrived near Saturn. They expected to see a wall of ships. Instead, I saw nothing. Space was empty. Kalen laughed over the open comms. Where are the ghosts? Where are the demons? Suddenly, the moons of Saturn began to change. The ice and rocks shifted, revealing massive lenses hidden beneath the surface. These were the Sol eyes, giant mirrors designed to focus the entire energy of the sun into single point. Before the Vorch could even charge their shields, a beam of pure white light hit the center of their fleet. It wasn't a laser, it was a piece of the sun itself. In an instant, 5,000 Vorch ships were turned into gas. The formation broke. The invincible fleet was now a collection of terrified pilots trying to find a way to escape, but the humans weren't done. From the shadows of the rings, the dark ships appeared. There were hundreds of them now. They didn't fire, they used gravity wells to pull the Vorch ships together, crushing them against each other like tin cans. The Vorch King's flagship was captured. Last, a single human transport docked with it. This time, only one person stepped out. It was a woman wearing an old-fashioned military jacket from the 21st century, a relic kept in a museum. She looked at Kalen, who was cowering on his throne. We gave the galaxy 500 years of peace, she said. Her voice was calm, which was much scarier than anger. We told you the price. Did you think we were joking? She didn't kill him. She gave him a small device. Go back to the council, show them what happened here. Tell them that the silence is over. From now on, we will be watching you closely. Every ship, every station, every word. The Vorch fleet was gone. The myth was now a reality again, and the galaxy realized that humanity hadn't grown weak. In peace, they had only become more perfect at the art of destruction. The galaxy was forever changed after the defeat of the Vorch. The humans did not return to their silence. Instead, they became the Sentinels. They didn't build an empire, and they didn't take any taxes, but they built a network of massive stations at every major jump point in the galaxy. These stations were called Eyes of Terra. They were unmanned, controlled by advanced AI that watched every ship that moved. If a species tried to start a war of conquest, the Eye would simply disable their fleet. If a species tried to commit genocide, the Eye would broadcast a warning. If they didn't stop, the dark ships would arrive. For the first time in history, the galaxy had a police force that couldn't be bribed, couldn't be argued with, and couldn't be beaten. On the world of Valhalla, the Galactic Council had become a place of deep thought rather than political games. They spent their days debating how to live in a world where war was no longer an option. The Luma ambassador, now an ancient being, sat in the center of the hall. We spent millions of years trying to find peace through treaties and trade, she told the word. Younger representatives, but the humans gave us peace through a wall of steel and a memory of fire. They are the monsters we created, and now they are the parents we must obey. Some of the younger species hated this. They felt like they were in a cage, but then they looked at the history of the Cricks and the Vorch and they stayed silent. They realized that the cage was the only thing keeping them from destroying themselves back on Earth. The transformation of the human spirit reached its final stage. The planet was now a paradise. There were no more cities made of concrete and glass. Instead, the humans lived in floating gardens and underground forests. They had mastered energy, meaning no one ever had to work for food or warmth. But despite this peace, every human was still a soldier at heart. Every year on the anniversary of the first Cricks attack, the entire planet would stop. For 1 hour there was total silence. They would remember the billions who died when the sky fell. They would remember Captain Miller, Colonel Vance, and General Thorne. This memory was the foundation of their power. It was why they never grew soft, and why they never forgot their duty to be the strongest. One day a new signal came from outside the galaxy. It wasn't from any known species. It was a message from a distant void thousands of light years away. It was a message of hunger, a species called the Devourers, who traveled between galaxies eating all life, had found the Milky Way. They were a swarm of billions of organic ships, bigger than anything the Council had ever seen. The Council panicked. They sent a message to Earth begging for help. The Devourers are coming, the message said. They have destroyed 10 galaxies before this one. We are all going to die. The response from Earth was short and simple. We know. Stay behind us. The battle at the edge of the galaxy was the largest ever seen. The Devourers arrived like a wall of teeth and claws. They expected to find a galaxy of weak prey. Instead, they found a human sentinel fleet waiting for them. It wasn't just a few ships, it was millions. The humans had been building this fleet for centuries, preparing for the day when a real threat would appear. The Devourers moved forward, firing beams of acid and biological spores. The Devourers' human ships didn't flinch. They opened fire with weapons that used black holes and antimatter. The space between the two forces became a bright line of death. The Devourers, who had never lost a fight, found themselves being pushed back. For the first time, the Eaters were being eaten. The war lasted only 3 days. The humans didn't just stop the Devourers, they chased them back into the void. They didn't want any survivors to tell the tale. They wanted the Devourers to be an example of what happens when you try to hunt in human territory. When the last organic ship was turned to ash, the human fleet returned to their stations. They didn't ask for a parade. They didn't ask for a reward. They simply went back to watching. The Council watched the sensors in disbelief. Threat that had destroyed entire galaxies had been wiped out by humanity. In a weekend, they finally understood that humanity wasn't just brutal. They were the ultimate protectors of life itself. Now in the far future, the story of the Great Human War is told on every planet. It is told in 1,000 different languages, but the meaning is always the same. It is a story about a species that was pushed too far. It is a story about how love for one's own kind can turn into a fire that can burn the stars. The humans still sit on their blue dot, watching the galaxy with their cold electronic eyes. They are the reason the stars are safe. They are the reason the small and the weak can sleep without fear. And even now, after thousands of years, whenever the name human is spoken, the galaxy still feels a shiver of respect and fear, for they are the ones who fought a war so brutal that it ended all wars. They are the masters of the dark, the kings of the light, and the eternal guardians of the Milky Way.